The sun hung low over the Wyoming plains, painting the sky in shades of amber and crimson. Caleb Holt stood at the edge of the dusty road, his boots scuffed from years of hard riding, his hat tilted against the glare. He was a tall man, broad-shouldered, with a face carved by wind and time. At 32, he'd built a life on his small ranch, cows, a few horses, and a cabin he'd raised with his own hands. It was a good life, but a lonely one. That's why he'd sent for her, the woman from Boston, Miss Eleanor Price. Months of letters, her neat cursive promising a gentle soul and a kind heart, had convinced him she was the one to share his days. The stagecoach was late. Caleb checked his pocket watch, the only keepsake from his father, and squinted down the road. Dust swirled in the distance, a faint rumble growing louder. His heart quickened, not just from anticipation but from the weight of what this moment meant. A wife, a partner, a new start. The coach rolled into view, its wheels creaking as it slowed. Caleb straightened, brushing dirt from his vest. The driver, a grizzled man named Amos, tipped his hat as he reined in the horses. "Holt," he called, "your package is here." Caleb nodded, his throat tight. The door swung open, and he waited for Eleanor, soft-spoken, delicate, as she described herself. But the woman who stepped down was no delicate flower. She was tall, nearly as tall as Caleb, with a lean frame under a worn duster coat. Her hair, dark as coal, was pinned messily under a wide-brimmed hat, and her eyes, sharp, green, and wary, scanned him like a hawk sizing up prey. A revolver hung low on her hip, the holster scuffed but well kept. This was no Boston lady. "You Caleb Holt." Her voice was low, edged with a drawl that didn't match Eleanor's prim letters. "I am," he said, frowning. "And you are." She smirked, stepping closer, her boots kicking up dust. "Name's Lila Kane. I reckon you were expectin' someone else." Caleb's hand rested near his own pistol, instinct honed from years of dealing with trouble. "Where's Eleanor Price?" Lila's eyes flickered, but she didn't flinch. "Eleanor's not comin'. She got cold feet back in Cheyenne. I was on the same coach, overheard her frettin' about life out here. Said she couldn't leave the city. So, I figured I'd take her place." Caleb's jaw tightened. "Take her place? This ain't a game, ma'am. I paid for that ticket. I wrote to her for months." Lila shrugged, unperturbed. "And I'm here, ain't I? I ain't askin' for your hand, mister. Just a place to lay low for a spell. I'm good with a gun, can work a ranch, and I don't scare easy. You need a partner, I need a hideout. Call it a fair trade." He studied her, suspicion warring with curiosity. Her confidence was unnerving, but there was something in her eyes, a flicker of desperation beneath the bravado. "Hideout, you runnin' from somethin'?" Her smirk faded. "Let's just say I've got folks lookin' for me. Nothing you need to worry about unless you make it your problem." Caleb didn't like it. He didn't like her tone, her gun, or the way she stood like she owned the ground beneath her. But the coach was already rattling away, and he was alone with this stranger. He could send her packing, but night was falling, and the nearest town was 20 miles off. Besides, something about her, maybe the way she met his gaze without blinking, made him think twice. "All right," he said finally. "You can stay the night. But come mornin', we figure this out. I ain't in the habit of housin' outlaws." She tipped her hat, a mocking gesture. "Much obliged, cowboy." The ride to the ranch was quiet, the only sound the creak of the wagon and the steady clip of his horse, Juniper. Lila sat beside him, her rifle across her lap, eyes scanning the horizon. Caleb kept his own counsel, wondering what kind of trouble he'd invited into his home. The cabin was modest but sturdy, its logs weathered but tight. A single lantern glowed in the window as they approached. Caleb tied Juniper to the post and gestured for Lila to follow. Inside, the air smelled of pine and leather. He lit another lantern, casting shadows across the sparse furnishings, a table, 2 chairs, a narrow bed in the corner. "You take the bed," he said gruffly. "I'll sleep by the fire." Lila raised an eyebrow but didn't argue. She set her rifle against the wall, within arm's reach, and dropped her hat on the table. "You always this hospitable to strangers?" "Only the armed ones," he shot back. She laughed, a low, throaty sound that caught him off guard. Fair enough. That night, Caleb lay on his bedroll by the hearth, listening to the creak of the bed as Lila shifted. He didn't trust her, not one bit, but he couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't just running from trouble, she was trouble. Yet, there was a steadiness to her, a kind of grit he recognized from his own hard years. Morning broke with the crow of a rooster. Caleb was up before dawn, tending to the chores. When Lila emerged, her coat was off, revealing a plain shirt tucked into trousers. She moved with purpose, grabbing a bucket to fetch water without being asked. "You know your way around a ranch," Caleb said, watching her haul the bucket with ease. "Grew up on one," she replied, not looking at him. "Texas." Before things went sideways, he didn't press her. Instead, he handed her a pitchfork. "Hay needs movin'. You wanna stay, you work." She took it, her grip firm. "Deal." For 3 days, they fell into an uneasy rhythm. Lila worked hard, mending fences, feeding the horses, even helping brand a few calves. She was no stranger to labor, and her aim with a rifle was uncanny, dropping a coyote at 50 yards when it got too close to the herd. Caleb watched her closely, waiting for her to slip, to reveal whatever she was hiding. But she kept her cards close, offering only scraps of her past: a childhood in Texas, a brother lost to fever, a life on the move. On the 4th night, as they sat by the fire, Caleb broke the silence. "Who's after you, Lila?" She stared into the flames, her fingers tracing the handle of her revolver. "You don't wanna know. Try me," she sighed, leaning back. "Bounty hunters. A man named Carver put a price on my head. Says I stole something from him. I didn't, but that don't matter when you've got a name like mine." "What's that supposed to mean?" She met his eyes, her gaze steady. "Lila Kane ain't my real name. It's one I picked up after I started running. My real name's tied to too many wanted posters." Caleb's hand tightened on his coffee mug. "You're telling me you're an outlaw. I'm telling you I've done things to survive. You wanna judge me, go ahead. But you've got no idea what it's like to have nothing and no one." He wanted to argue, to send her packing, but something in her voice stopped him. He'd known loss too, his parents to a fever, his brother to a bar fight gone wrong. He'd built this ranch to escape that pain, to carve out something solid. Maybe Lila was doing the same, in her own way. Before he could respond, a horse's whinny cut through the night. Caleb was on his feet in an instant, grabbing his rifle. Lila was right behind him, her revolver drawn. They stepped onto the porch, the darkness thick beyond the lantern's glow. "Riders," Lila whispered, her voice low. 3, maybe 4. Caleb squinted into the night. Sure enough, shadows moved in the distance, the faint clink of spurs and hooves growing louder. "Get inside," he said. "Not a chance." She cocked her revolver. "This is my fight." The riders stopped just beyond the yard. Their faces shadowed under wide hats. The leader, a wiry man with a scar across his cheek, called out. "Lila Kane, we know you're here. Come out, and maybe we let the cowboy live." Caleb's blood ran cold. He glanced at Lila, who stood like a coiled spring, her eyes blazing. "Carver's men," she muttered. "They found me." "You know 'em?" Caleb asked. "Too well." She stepped forward, her voice steady. "You want me, Carver? Come and get me." The scarred man laughed, drawing his gun. "Have it your way." What followed was chaos. Shots rang out, splitting the night. Caleb ducked behind the porch rail, firing at the shapes in the dark. Lila moved like a ghost, her revolver barking as she took down one rider with a single shot. Caleb hit another, the man slumping from his saddle. The scarred leader cursed, spurring his horse forward, but Lila was faster. She vaulted over the rail, tackling him to the ground. They grappled in the dust, her knife flashing as she pinned him. "Enough," she shouted, her blade at his throat. "Call off your dogs, or you're done." The remaining rider froze, his gun half raised. The scarred man spat blood, glaring up at her. "You're dead, Kane. Carver'll find you. Then tell him I'm waitin'," she snarled, slamming the butt of her revolver into his temple. He went limp. The last rider fled into the night, leaving his fallen comrades. Caleb lowered his rifle, his heart pounding. Lila stood, wiping blood from her knife, her chest heaving. For a moment, they just stared at each other, the air thick with gunpowder and unspoken questions. "You all right?" Caleb asked finally. She nodded, sheathing her knife. "You been better." He gestured to the unconscious man. "What do we do with him?" "Leave him. He'll wake up and crawl back to Carver. Or he won't." Caleb didn't like it, but he didn't argue. They dragged the bodies out of sight, and Lila cleaned her revolver by the firelight. "I'll leave at first light," she said quietly. "This ain't your fight." Caleb sat across from her, his mind racing. He should let her go. She was trouble, plain and simple. But the past few days had shown him something else, a woman who worked as hard as he did, who didn't flinch in a fight, who carried her scars with the same stubborn pride he did. He thought of Eleanor's letters, her promises of a gentle life. Maybe that wasn't what he needed. Stay, he said, the word surprising even himself. Lila looked up, her eyes narrowing. You heard what they said. Carver won't stop. Then we face him together. He leaned forward, his voice firm. I don't know your whole story, Lila, and maybe I never will. But you're no coward, and neither am I. This ranch is mine, and I say who stays. She studied him, her expression unreadable. Then, slowly, she nodded. All right, Cowboy, but don't say I didn't warn you. The next morning, they buried the dead in a shallow grave beyond the pasture. Lila worked silently, her face set. Caleb watched her, wondering what he'd gotten himself into. But as they rode out to check the herd, her rifle slung across her back, he felt a strange certainty. This wasn't the life he'd planned, but maybe it was the one he was meant for. Weeks passed, and Lila stayed. They worked side by side, her sharp wit and quick draw becoming as much a part of the ranch as the cattle. Word of Carver's men spread, but no more riders came. Maybe they were biding their time. Maybe Lila's reputation was enough to keep them at bay. Either way, Caleb didn't care. He'd made his choice. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Lila spoke softly. You ever think about what might have been? With Eleanor, Caleb chuckled, tipping his hat back. Sometimes, but I reckon she wouldn't have lasted a day out here.